It was an ordinary day aboard the military transport ship, Starborn, floating in the cold expanse of space. The crew members were going about their duties, unaware of the sudden change that was about to alter the course of their mission. Captain James Monroe, a seasoned officer with years of experience, stood at the helm of the ship. His thoughts were on the routine mission ahead, nothing extraordinary, just a simple transport of supplies to a distant colony. But that all changed when the alarm blared across the ship, Red Alert. James' heart skipped a beat. He turned sharply, his face grim. The intercom crackled to life. "Captain, we have incoming ships, unknown origin. They're closing fast." Before he could respond, the lights dimmed, and the ship shook violently as if it had been hit by a heavy storm. The crew scrambled to their stations, but the communication system was down. The threat was real, and it was far too close for comfort. Outside the ship, the stars flickered in the distance, but something else was emerging from the darkness. A fleet of sleek black ships moving with deadly precision. Their design was unlike anything James had seen before, an alien force that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. The alien ships were not just fast. They were deadly. In moments, they disabled the Starborn's defenses and crippled its engines. The crew struggled to maintain control, but it was clear they were outmatched. The ship was no longer in the safety of space. It was now a battle zone. James barely had time to think before the power was cut to the ship's life support systems, and the interior grew colder. His breath fogged in the air as he watched helplessly as the alien fleet surrounded them. His mind raced. They had to make a decision quickly. If they didn't, the ship and its crew would be doomed. "Prepare for boarding," he shouted to the crew. "Get to your posts, we've got to defend this ship." The crew rushed to their positions, but James knew the odds were against them. These weren't just any invaders, they were organized and terrifyingly efficient. James' thoughts were interrupted by a loud bang on the hull, signaling that the enemy had breached the outer wall. Panic spread among the crew as they heard the sound of foreign footsteps echoing through the metal halls. James had no choice but to lead his team to repel the invaders, but what he saw next was beyond his wildest expectations. The doors to the bridge opened, and in stepped a figure, alien and graceful, a Vulpine girl. She stood tall, her orange fur almost glowing under the dim light, her large, expressive eyes locked on James. She was stunning in a way that made it hard for him to focus. Her ears twitched as if she was aware of his every movement. She was dressed in a sleek suit that blended with the ship's design, but had an unmistakable alien edge to it. Her tail swished behind her, almost like it had a life of its own. For a moment, everything froze. The crew had no idea what to do. They had never seen anything like her. Was she a weapon? A leader? James couldn't tell, but the look in her eyes said that she was no ordinary alien. She was something more. Before James could speak, the girl took a step forward and stopped. A strange stillness filled the room as she stared directly at him, her gaze intense, yet there was a quiet kindness behind it. She wasn't aggressive and she wasn't attacking. Instead, she spoke. "We do not wish to harm you." James blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. The alien tongue she spoke was foreign, but somehow he understood. It was as if her words connected directly with his mind. "You don't want to fight?" James asked, his voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. Vulpine girl nodded. "We came to stop the war, not to start one." "But we need your help." James' mind raced. Stop the war? The war that had just begun? What did she mean? Before he could ask further, she glanced over her shoulder. Her crew was slowly entering the room, and James noticed they were not the monstrous invaders he had expected. They were just like her alien beings with unique features, but none of them seemed hostile. "I have no choice but to trust you," James said, lowering his weapon. The situation was far from clear, but one thing was certain. The universe was about to change forever. And the Vulpine girl was at the center of it all. Her tail swished again, and she gave him a small knowing smile. Then allow me to explain. But first, may I accept your gift? James blinked again, confused. What gift was she talking about? You see, she continued, the cold of space is unforgiving. A simple blanket, a gesture of kindness, could help more than you know. James stood still, his mind still trying to process the unexpected turn of events. The alien girl's request, simple, yet strange, caught him off guard. She was asking for a blanket in the midst of a galactic conflict. To most, it would seem trivial. But to him, it felt like a puzzle piece he couldn't quite fit together. He glanced around at the crew, their eyes filled with confusion and fear. Was this some kind of trick? Had the enemy figured out a way to manipulate them with kindness? But there was no malice in her expression. There was something almost human about her. Her fur, her gaze, her movements, they all seemed too natural, too real. The air between them felt heavy with an unspoken understanding. James shook his head slightly, clearing his thoughts. He couldn't afford to waste time doubting now. He needed to make a decision fast. Captain, what should we do? Sergeant Harper, one of the crew members, asked nervously, his weapon still in hand. James didn't answer immediately. He looked back at the Vulpine girl, whose calm demeanor seemed completely out of place in this tense situation. There was an odd sense of peace about her, something that contrasted sharply with the urgency of their peril. Why would you need a blanket? James asked, his voice steady but laced with suspicion. If you want to negotiate, we're open to that, but you have to explain first. The Vulpine girl smiled softly, and her tail flicked behind her, as if she were amused by his question. It is not just about the blanket, she said, her voice warm and melodic, carrying a tone of sincerity. It is a symbol, a small offering of peace. In my culture, the sharing of warmth is a gesture of trust, and right now, I am offering you mine. James was taken aback by her words. It was a simple act, but it carried such weight. His military training told him to be cautious, to view everything as a potential threat, but something in her eyes told him that this was different. She wasn't an enemy. She was something else. Captain, we've got more incoming ships. On the radar, Lieutenant Rodriguez interrupted, his voice tense. We won't have much time to figure this out. The urgency in Rodriguez's tone snapped James back to reality. His thoughts were running in 100 different directions, but his duty as the leader of the crew came first. He turned to the Vulpine girl. We don't have much time. You said you wanted to stop the war. How can we trust that you're telling the truth? How do we know you're not leading us into an even worse situation? Her gaze softened, and she took a slow step forward. I can understand your doubt. It is hard to trust someone when your life is on the line. But you must know, this war is not one that we started. It was forced upon us. And I came here because I believe you can help us stop it. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. James studied her, trying to read any hint of deception. But there was nothing but calm sincerity. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't here to destroy them. I don't know how we can help, James said, still unsure of how to respond. We're not equipped to fight an entire fleet. No, she replied gently. But you have something far more valuable than weapons knowledge. I need your help to stop a greater force, one that threatens not just your world, but all worlds. Her words sent a chill down James' spine. He hadn't expected this. He thought the war was just about conquering planets, about domination. But now he was beginning to see that there was something much larger at play. The war is being manipulated. She continued. A dark force is pulling the strings, and it has already set the wheels in motion. We were sent to warn you, to offer you a chance to stop it before it's too late. James didn't know what to think. He had been trained to face enemies head-on, to fight until the end. But this wasn't the kind of enemy he was used to dealing with. This wasn't a war for resources or power. It was something more sinister. The sound of distant explosions and the hum of alien ships outside brought him back to the present. He had to act. He had to protect his crew. "I'm listening," he said, his voice low and serious. The Vulpine girl nodded. "Then listen carefully, Captain. We have one chance to stop this. It's a dangerous path, but if we can work together, we can defeat the dark force that threatens us all. And I believe you are the key to unlocking it." For the first time since the battle had begun, James felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this strange alien girl wasn't just an enemy. Perhaps she was the ally they needed. "I don't fully understand," James said, "but I'll do what I can to help." Her smile deepened, and for the first time, James saw a hint of relief in her eyes. "Then we will stop the war, together." The hum of the ship's emergency systems was the only sound that filled the room as James tried to absorb the gravity of the situation. The Vulpine girl, standing before him with her peaceful yet powerful presence, seemed completely in control, even though everything around them was falling apart. Outside the ship's hull, the black alien fleet loomed like a shadow, their ships ominously silent as they surrounded the Starborn. James had never faced a situation quite like this. He had dealt with space pirates, hostile alien forces, and even political disputes, but this was different. The girl before him wasn't like the others he had fought. She wasn't a conqueror, a destroyer, or a murderer. She was something entirely new, and the way she spoke so confident, yet calm, had him questioning everything he had believed about the enemy. "I need to know everything," James said, firmly, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "If we're going to stop this war, I need to understand what we're really up against." The Vulpine girl nodded. "I understand your hesitation, but I must warn you, Captain. The truth is far darker than you realize." Her words sent a cold shiver down James' spine. He had expected a difficult enemy, but not this. He had no idea what kind of darkness was lurking just beyond their grasp. "We are part of a race of beings known as the Verax," she began, her voice calm, but her eyes darkening as she spoke. "We were once a peaceful species, living in harmony with the universe. But that peace was shattered by an ancient and powerful force, the Harbingers. They are not just another race of aliens. They are something far more dangerous, something that feeds on chaos and destruction." James felt his heart rate increase. The mention of the Harbingers struck a chord deep within him. He had heard whispers about them in the far reaches of space, about a race of beings that destroyed entire civilizations without mercy. Legends told of their insatiable hunger for power, their ability to manipulate entire galaxies to their will. "You're saying the Harbingers are the ones who started this war?" James asked, struggling to connect the dots. "Why would they do that? What do they want from us?" The Vulpine girl's expression grew more serious. "The Harbingers are a force of nature, driven by an ancient desire to spread darkness across the galaxy. They manipulate the minds of weaker species, turning them against each other. This war is only the beginning of their plan to consume everything in their path." James felt a wave of anger wash over him. The Harbingers had already caused so much destruction across the galaxy, and now they were pushing his crew, his ship, and his world into the same nightmare. He had no choice but to fight back. "How do we stop them?" James asked urgently, his voice almost a whisper. "How can we even hope to stand against such power?" The Vulpine girl hesitated, her eyes flickering as if she were weighing her words carefully. "There is a way, but it requires more than just firepower. The Harbingers are not defeated by weapons alone. They are defeated by light. The light of unity, of shared strength. Their power thrives on division, on the chaos they create. But if we can unite the different races, if we can form an alliance, the Harbingers will lose their grip." James was silent for a moment, processing the information. It was a hard truth, one that went against everything he had ever learned as a soldier. He had been trained to fight, to lead his crew into battle against tangible enemies, foes he could see, touch, and fight. But this was something different. The enemy was not just an alien race, it was a force, a cancer that could destroy everything they knew by turning people against each other. "We can unite the galaxy," James said, a spark of determination in his voice. "We have to. It's the only way we'll survive." The Vulpine girl's eyes softened. "I knew you would understand, Captain. That's why I came to you. I believe you are the one who can bring this alliance together. But time is running out. The Harbingers are already influencing the minds of other factions, turning them against us. We have only a short window to act before it's too late." The sound of distant explosions outside interrupted their conversation, and James glanced at the screens. The alien fleet had begun to move closer, their ships forming a tight formation around the Starborn. It was clear that they weren't here to simply destroy, they were here to ensure that the war they had started would consume everything in its path. He turned back to the Vulpine girl. "Tell me what we need to do. I'll do whatever it takes to stop this." She nodded, stepping closer, her eyes locked onto his. "First, we need to find the ancient artifact hidden within the heart of your ship. It's a relic from a time long before the Harbingers. It contains a powerful energy, a force of unity that can break their hold. It's the key to our victory." James didn't hesitate. He knew that the mission ahead would be dangerous, perhaps even deadly, but he also knew that this was their only chance. His crew needed him. The galaxy needed him. "We'll find it," James said firmly. "Let's get to work." The pressure inside the Starborn was mounting. James could feel it in his chest, the weight of responsibility bearing down on him with every passing second. The Vulpine girl who had introduced herself as Lyra had spoken of an ancient artifact, hidden somewhere deep within the ship. This artifact, she believed, held the power to break the Harbinger's control over the galaxy, but time was running out. The alien fleet was closing in, and the crew had no idea what kind of threat they were truly facing. Lyra's knowledge of the Starborn's design was uncanny. She seemed to know the ship better than its own crew, navigating the labyrinth of halls and corridors with ease. As they moved through the ship, James couldn't help but notice how effortlessly she blended into the surroundings. Her movements were smooth, almost predatory, yet graceful, her Vulpine features seeming to shimmer under the dim lights of the ship. "We're getting closer," Lyra said quietly, her voice carrying an air of urgency. She glanced over her shoulder at James. "The artifact is in the heart of the ship, its core, where the energy conduits intersect. If we don't reach it before the Harbingers fully activate their influence, the galaxy will fall into darkness." James nodded, determination setting in his features. He had no idea how an artifact could change the course of a war, but he trusted her. They had no other choice but to follow her lead. "We'll get there," James said, his voice low, focused. "But we need to be ready for anything. If there are Harbinger forces aboard, we're going to need backup." Lyra stopped suddenly, her ears twitching, alert. "They're here. Their influence has already begun to seep into the ship." James' heart skipped a beat. The air seemed to grow colder, more oppressive. He could almost feel something shifting around them, a presence in the shadows, waiting. The Harbingers had arrived. "We won't make it to the core without a fight," Lyra continued, her eyes narrowing, as she listened to the distant sounds of clanging metal and the faint hum of alien technology activating in the walls. "I need you to trust me, Captain. The artifact is the key. Without it, everything you know will be lost." James knew that she was right. The ship was under siege. The Harbinger's fleet had already disabled their defenses, and their forces were boarding the ship. He couldn't afford to waste time. "Harper, Rodriguez, form up," James barked, signaling to his crew. They quickly gathered around, weapons raised, scanning the hallway. every creak of the ship's metal, and every shadow that passed sent a ripple of tension through the air. They moved forward in a tight formation, their footsteps echoing in the narrow corridor. The ship seemed to be alive with the sound of distant machinery, but James knew that the real danger was far closer than they realized. The Harbingers had the power to manipulate minds, turning allies into enemies, creating chaos from within. As they approached the heart of the ship, James could feel a strange pull in the air, a magnetic force drawing him toward the center of the Starborn. Lyra, however, seemed unaffected by it. She moved ahead, her eyes locked onto the path. They rounded a corner, and there, standing at the threshold of the core, were several Harbinger soldiers. Their bodies were almost indistinguishable from the shadows, their forms dark and wraith-like, barely visible in the dim light. But their eyes, those glowing, unnatural eyes, gave them away. Without hesitation, James raised his weapon and fired. The first Harbinger soldier collapsed in a puff of smoke, but the others advanced, moving with inhuman speed and precision. They were everywhere, appearing from walls, corners, and vents, as if they were part of the very ship itself. "Hold the line!" James shouted. His crew fired in unison, but the Harbingers were relentless, pushing forward with terrifying force. The energy blasts from the Starborn's weapons had little effect on them, passing harmlessly through their ethereal forms. Lyra, however, was unaffected. She darted forward, her movements fluid and fast as she engaged the Harbingers directly. With each strike, her claws seemed to burn through the air, cutting through the enemies with a precision that left James stunned. "Lyra!" James shouted, trying to keep up, but the Harbingers were relentless. He could feel the tide turning against them. Then, just as quickly as they had come, the Harbingers stopped. Their eerie presence receded, as if something had forced them to retreat. James didn't waste a second. "Now, Lyra!" "The artifact!" She nodded and sprinted ahead, her tail flicking behind her. As they reached the heart of the ship, Lyra stopped before a large, glowing console. It hummed with energy, and as she approached, the lights seemed to pulse brighter, responding to her presence. "The artifact is here," Lyra said, placing her hand on the console. It began to shimmer, revealing an ancient, spherical object glowing with a light that felt warm and alive, yet tinged with something more powerful, something beyond ordinary understanding. James couldn't take his eyes off it. The artifact was not just an object, it was a conduit of energy, of pure power. It pulsed with a frequency that seemed to call to him, to everything around them. Lyra turned to face him, her expression now serious, almost grave. "This artifact holds the power to unite the galaxy, to break the Harbinger's hold. But we must act quickly. The artifact's energy will only work if we can channel it properly. We need to send a signal to every corner of the galaxy." James knew this was it. The moment that would decide the fate of everything. He had to trust the Vulpine girl. They had to use the artifact, but what would it cost? Would they be able to stop the Harbingers, or would they be consumed by the same darkness that threatened the galaxy? "Let's do it," James said, his voice steady. He stepped forward and joined Lyra at the console. The artifact, glowing with an almost blinding light, sat at the center of the core. The moment James touched it, a surge of energy flowed through him, a strange, almost overwhelming sensation. It wasn't like anything he had ever felt before. The energy seemed to resonate deep within him, like a forgotten memory coming to life. He could feel the galaxy stretching out before him, as though the very stars were within his grasp. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the pulsing light of the artifact. She didn't seem affected by the surge, her composure as calm as ever, though there was an unmistakable intensity in her gaze. "Focus, Captain," Lyra urged, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "This artifact is not just a weapon. It's a bridge of connection. It will unite us, but it requires your strength to channel its power. You must direct it to the hearts of the galaxy." James nodded. swallowing his rising anxiety. He could feel the weight of the task ahead. The artifact wasn't just about power, it was about influence. It was about bringing together the fractured galaxy in a way that no one had ever dared before. The hum in the room grew louder, the artifact's light now dazzling, sending beams of energy into the walls. Suddenly, the ship groaned, as if it, too, was reacting to the energy pouring from the core. James instinctively stepped back, knowing that the ship was no longer simply a machine. It had become part of something far larger. "We need to activate it now," James said, his voice shaking slightly. The reality of what was happening began to sink in. "If we don't, the Harbingers will stop us before we have the chance." Lyra nodded. "We have one shot at this. If we can send the signal, it will rally the forces of the galaxy, from the most distant colonies to the most powerful fleets. But we must do it together." James reached forward, placing his hands on the artifact. As his fingers made contact, a shock of energy coursed through him, and his mind was flooded with visions, glimpses of distant planets, ships, and species he had never encountered before. The galaxies, the stars, the countless lives in the universe, they were all connected. All of them were linked, bound together by a force much older than the Harbingers or their endless wars. Then the images shifted. He saw the Harbingers again, not as the wraith-like beings that had boarded their ship, but as something much more terrifying, an all-consuming darkness that spread through the galaxy like a disease. They were not just conquerors. They were destroyers, their very presence, feeding on the energy of entire worlds. James gritted his teeth. The galaxy was at the brink. He had to stop them. He had to give them a reason to fight back. "Now," Lyra urged, her voice cutting through his thoughts. With a deep breath, James gathered every ounce of his will and focused all the energy from the artifact toward the heart of the galaxy. The light from the artifact blazed brighter, nearly blinding him as it spread outward, like a pulse racing through the void of space. The ship trembled violently as the power from the artifact surged forward, sending a shockwave through the fabric of space itself. The signal shot out in all directions, carrying a message of unity, of strength, of hope. The universe was waking up. The Harbinger's dark influence had been disrupted. Suddenly, the comm system came to life, crackling with static. Then, a familiar voice broke through. "Captain Monroe, this is Admiral Lee from the Terran fleet. We're picking up your signal." "What's the status on the Starborn?" James couldn't believe it. The fleet had received the signal. They were responding. "This is Captain Monroe," he said, his voice steady. "We found the artifact, and we've activated it. The galaxy is ready to fight back." There was a pause on the other end, and then Admiral Lee's voice returned, filled with determination. "Understood, Captain. We're assembling a fleet to rendezvous with your position. Hold tight. We're coming to help." James couldn't contain the surge of relief that washed over him. The galaxy was finally united not through force, but through a shared will to survive. The first wave of support was on its way, but before he could respond, Lyra's voice interrupted his thoughts. "It's not over, Captain." James looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "We've sent the signal. They'll come. The Harbingers are far more dangerous than you know," she said, her expression tightening with concern. "Their influence is vast, and they will not give up easily. They will come for us whether we're ready or not." Just then, the alarms began blaring again, louder than ever before. "They're here," Lyra said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "They're coming for the artifact, and we're not prepared for what they'll bring." The doors to the core room suddenly burst open, and a wave of Harbinger soldiers flooded in, their eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. Their weapons crackled with dark energy, and the ship's artificial gravity seemed to flicker with each step they took. James stood his ground, a sense of finality settling in. He had united the galaxy, But now the real test began. The Harbingers had arrived, and it was time to face them head-on. "We fight," James said, looking at his crew, and, "Lyra, we fight, or we lose everything." Lyra nodded. "Let's show them that we won't be consumed by their darkness." The Starborn shook violently as the Harbinger soldiers stormed into the core room. James felt the pulse of adrenaline surge through his veins. His crew quickly positioned themselves, weapons drawn, ready to defend the artifact at all costs. The Harbingers were relentless. Each soldier moved with the precision of a predator, their eyes burning with the unnatural glow that marked them as part of the all-consuming darkness that threatened the galaxy. James glanced at Lyra, who stood beside him, her claws flexing in preparation for the battle. Her calm, unwavering gaze gave him the strength he needed to face this overwhelming enemy. "They've come to destroy everything we've worked for," James said, his voice low, filled with resolve. "But we're not going down without a fight." Lyra nodded, her tail flicking behind her. "The artifact has given us a chance, but it's up to you now, Captain. You and your crew. You must defend it, because if they destroy it, all hope will be lost." James turned to his crew, who were positioned in the tight hallway leading to the core room. The odds were against them. But he knew that if they were going to win, they had to hold their ground. The artifact was the key to uniting the galaxy. If the Harbingers destroyed it, the darkness would spread even faster than before. It was a battle they couldn't afford to lose. "Harper, Rodriguez, take the left flank. Keep them from reaching the core. Maya, get the emergency systems online. We need every ounce of power we can muster," James ordered. His voice was steady, but underneath, he could feel the weight of the moment. The crew moved into position, the tension palpable in the air. The distant sound of Harbinger footfalls grew louder. They were close. James gripped his rifle tightly, taking a deep breath, preparing for the battle of his life. Suddenly, the first wave of Harbingers burst into the room. They were fast, their bodies flickering in and out of the shadows, as if they weren't entirely bound by the laws of reality. But that didn't stop James and his crew. The Starborn's crew responded immediately, their weapons firing in perfect synchronization, lighting up the darkened hallways with a flurry of energy blasts. The Harbingers retaliated with their own weapons, dark energy streaking toward the crew. The energy blasts hit the walls around them, causing them to crack and sizzle. But the crew held their ground. James could see the struggle on his crew's faces. They were fighting for their lives, for the survival of everything they knew. But they weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for the future of the entire galaxy. They were fighting for peace. Lyra leaped into action, her movements swift and graceful, her claws slicing through the air as she engaged the Harbingers head-on. Her speed was unmatched, her strikes precise. She wasn't just a fighter, she was an embodiment of the strength and unity they needed to defeat the darkness. James stayed close to the artifact, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of weakness. He knew that the Harbingers would stop at nothing to take it. The glowing sphere pulsed in the center of the room, a beacon of light in the midst of the chaos. But its light was growing dimmer, flickering with the force of the Harbinger's assault. "Captain!" Lyra shouted, her voice breaking through the noise of battle. "They're trying to corrupt the artifact. You must protect it." James's heart raced as he realized what was happening. The Harbingers weren't just trying to destroy the artifact, they were trying to corrupt its power, to turn it against them. If they succeeded, the galaxy would be lost forever. The artifact, the symbol of unity, would become another weapon in their arsenal. Hold them off. James barked, his voice filled with urgency. "We can't let them near it." With renewed determination, James sprinted toward the artifact, his weapon blazing. He reached it just as the Harbingers closed in, their eyes glowing brighter than ever before. The closer they got, the more the room seemed to warp around them, as if their presence was bending reality itself. James took a deep breath and placed his hands on the artifact, willing all of his strength into the power it contained. The energy coursed through him once more, but this time it felt different. It was stronger, more focused. The light from the artifact flared brighter, pushing back against the darkness that threatened to consume it. The harbingers recoiled, their forms flickering as if they were unsure how to respond. James could feel the power of the artifact pushing back against the corruption, fighting the dark influence with every pulse of light. But it wasn't enough. They were too close. That's when he realized what he had to do. "Lyra!" James shouted. "Help me channel the energy together." Lyra rushed to his side, her eyes filled with understanding. "Do it, Captain. Let the light flow." Together, they placed their hands on the artifact. The surge of energy that flowed between them was almost overwhelming. It was as though every star in the galaxy was feeding into them, pouring its light through the artifact, amplifying its power 1,000 times over. The harbingers faltered, their forms flickering wildly, as if they were being torn apart by the intensity of the light. Then, with a final burst of energy, the artifact's light exploded outward, engulfing the room in a blinding flash. The harbingers screamed, their forms disintegrating into nothingness as the light consumed them. The room was filled with the sound of their shrieking voices, a cacophony of destruction as the darkness was driven back, banished from the Starborn. When the light finally faded, James and Lyra stood alone in the heart of the ship. The artifact was still glowing, its power radiating with a steady, calm pulse. The harbingers were gone, defeated, their influence shattered. James looked at Lyra, who was breathing heavily but smiling. Her Vulpine features seemed softer now, her eyes no longer filled with the fear of a galaxy on the edge of annihilation. "They had won. It's over," James said, his voice hoarse from the intensity of the battle. "We did it." Lyra nodded. "You did it. The galaxy is free." James looked out toward the stars beyond the ship's hull, a sense of peace washing over him. The war was over. The galaxy was no longer on the brink of destruction. But the work wasn't done. They had united the galaxy, now they had to rebuild, to ensure that the darkness of the harbingers would never return. As the first waves of the Terran fleet arrived, James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They had won. The galaxy had been saved, and it was time for a new beginning. "Let's go," he said, turning to Lyra. "The future is waiting."